Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and hopefully bring you some clarity.
That's the goal.
And today, we're really diving deep, embarking on a journey into the early days of, well, a pretty enigmatic figure, Charlie Kirk.
Someone who rose very, very quickly.
Incredibly quickly. Our mission really is to unpack his origins, the founding of Turning Point USA, and try to examine those powerful, sometimes hidden forces that shaped his rise. We want to hold up that initial vision, the promise, against the realities that sort of emerged almost immediately.
And it's such a vital thing to do, isn't it? When any movement or any figurehead bursts onto the scene like that,
Yeah.
understanding the foundations, where it came from, the initial push, it's
Yeah.
absolutely crucial. It helps you grasp the real direction, the trajectory, and, the impact it has on society
Right.
down the line.
Because what you see on the surface,
Exactly. Especially when it's presented with a really appealing narrative, it can often hide much more complex motivations, and that can lead to very different outcomes than maybe what was first promised or perceived.
so we're going to try and pull back some of those layers today.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's get into it. Charlie Kirk, born in Arlington Heights, Illinois. That was 1993.
Right.
And what's just immediately striking is the speed.
Mm.
By 2012, he's only 18 years old, and he co-founds Turning Point USA, TPUSA.
18. It's quite remarkable. I mean, think about it. At 18, most people are thinking about exams, maybe college applications.
Exactly. Not launching a national political group. It's, by any measure, a really rapid ascent.
Yeah.
Almost unheard of, really.
And his path wasn't exactly standard either. From what we understand, there was this key moment early on.
Ah, the West Point rejection.
Precisely. He aimed for West Point, didn't get in, but instead of that being, a major setback that derailed him, it seemed to act as a catalyst.
A pivot point.
A huge pivot point. He dropped out of community college, Harper College, I believe, and decided right then to dedicate himself entirely to activism.
That's a big decision at that age.
Huge. It wasn't just dabbling. It signals this complete commitment to a political path, turning that personal disappointment into, well, the launch pad for a very public career.
Okay, so TPUSA is founded. What were its initial stated goals? What was the pitch?
Well, the pitch was pretty clear and, frankly, quite appealing to a specific audience. It positioned itself as this fresh, energetic voice for youth empowerment.
Right, on college campuses?
Exactly. Promoting free market principles, limited government, basically trying to encourage young conservatives to get involved, to debate, to embrace personal responsibility.
So kind of presented as a grassroots thing.
Very much so. Presented as a grassroots effort to give conservative ideas a platform for a younger generation, particularly those who maybe felt their views weren't welcome or heard on campuses that they saw as increasingly liberal. It resonated.
Yeah, you can see the appeal. From the outside, looking in, especially if you were part of that target demographic, it really did look like a genuine high-energy movement. Kirk and TPUSA, they were out there positioning themselves as these champions ready to, quote, debate liberals
Right. That was a big part of the branding.
and fostering that idea of individual accountability. It felt like a real effort to empower young people with a conservative viewpoint, appealing to that sense of maybe being unheard.
It absolutely did, creating this compelling image. Youthful energy challenging the status quo, self-reliance, intellectual sparring. It was a powerful narrative.
Okay, but, and there's often a but, when things rise this fast,
Yeah.
this is where it starts to get more complex, right?
This is where we need to peel back another layer.
Because as we started digging deeper, this crucial element emerged, one that really fueled TPUSA's rapid growth, something often missed if you just focus on Kirk himself.
And that's the money.
The money, the role of wealthy donors. It wasn't just grassroots enthusiasm paying the bills.
Not at all. This backing was significant, instrumental right from the beginning. We're talking about established, wealthy, conservative figures. People like Foster Fries, Bernard Marcus,
Big names in conservative funding circles.
very big names. They provided significant early support, and that support didn't just stabilize the organization, it grew massively.
How much are we talking?
Well, TPUSA's reported revenue surged. By 2024, it reached something like $85 million.
Wow, $85 million. That's serious organizational capacity.
Absolutely. And that growth was fueled by major contributions from people like Richard Uihlein, another huge donor on the right, and also entities like Donors Trust.
Donors Trust. That name comes up a lot in these discussions. How does that work?
Right. Donors Trust is what's known as a donor-advised fund. It essentially allows wealthy individuals to donate large sums, often anonymously.
Ah, so it can obscure the original source of the money.
Exactly. It provides a layer of privacy, making it harder to track exactly who is funding which political initiatives. It's a significant channel for money, particularly conservative money, into the political and policy arenas.
Okay, so you have this influx of serious cash from established, wealthy conservatives.
Yeah.
How does that connect to the message? Did the message change?
Well, this is where it gets fascinating. The interplay between the funding and the message.
Mm-hmm.
What might start out seeming like a pure focus on, say, broad free market ideas or youth empowerment
Yeah.
can sometimes subtly, sometimes maybe more overtly, begin to align more closely with the specific interests of those major donors.
So the people writing the checks might have specific priorities.
It's a powerful dynamic. Stated principles, even if genuinely held, can become intertwined with, influenced by, the need to keep that funding flowing. For example, a general call for limited government might slowly shift towards pushing for deregulation in specific industries, perhaps industries where key donors have significant financial stakes.
Right. It might not even be a conscious, like, let's change our whole mission decision.
Exactly. It can be more of a gravitational pull. Organizations naturally tend towards activities and messages that resonate with their funding base. It's a complex relationship, not always straightforward.
And while the organization itself was growing, what about Kirk personally? Did his financial situation change?
That's another piece that really stood out in the financial records we examined. His own salary saw a pretty dramatic increase.
How dramatic.
Well, it reportedly went from around $27,000 early on to approximately $300,000 by 2020.
$27,000 to $300,000.
Yeah.
That's quite a jump.
It's a substantial increase in personal income, happening right alongside TPUSA's expansion and growing influence. It certainly raises questions about the personal financial incentives involved in leading a movement often framed as anti-establishment.
Which brings us to that apparent contradiction, doesn't it? The public positioning versus the financial reality.
Precisely. Kirk often publicly positioned himself as anti-elite, railing against globalists, the establishment.
Yeah, that's a core part of the brand.
But the financial reality, both for the organization heavily reliant on elite donors and for his own personal wealth accumulation, suggests a more complex alignment.
It shows how a mission can, well, evolve. Maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously.
It can evolve to serve certain interests, perhaps elite interests, rather than staying purely focused on maybe broader goals like social harmony or well-being for everyone.
And that America First messaging.
Well, that slogan resonated powerfully with many people who felt left behind. Absolutely, it sounded protective. But often that kind of rhetoric echoed a more exclusionary form of nationalism.
Defining the nation by who's not included.
In a way, yes, defining the youth strongly against them. And historically, that kind of exclusionary nationalism, while appealing to some, often tends to create division and conflict rather than fostering unity within a diverse society.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. We started with this image. Young, dynamic founder, fresh voice, principles like personal responsibility, free markets.
With the compelling early promise.
Right. How does that initial picture hold up when you place it alongside the reality we've just discussed? The huge donor influence, the shifting focus, the personal enrichment.
The contrast becomes pretty stark, doesn't it?
It does seem quite stark.
What seems clear is that the appealing narrative, debate the liberals, personal responsibility, while incredibly effective at mobilizing a base, particularly young people, it often masked, or at least existed alongside, a deeper, more complex agenda, an agenda significantly shaped and propelled by that substantial, strategically directed donor money.
Prioritizing donor interests, perhaps.
It often prioritized specific donor-backed interests over, say, a more universally focused approach to well-being. It shows how public rhetoric can be a powerful tool to gather support, even while the organization's actual mission might be subtly or not so subtly aligning with its financial patrons.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, what are the implications?
Well, the implications are significant. While you could definitely say Charlie Kirk inspired a certain kind of civic engagement in many young people,
Yes, he certainly got people involved.
a deeper look at the trajectory reveals a pattern that seems more aligned with protecting specific elite interests and promoting that type of exclusionary nationalism we mentioned earlier.
And you're saying this isn't about judging the individuals who got involved?
Not at all. People are often drawn to movements for very genuine reasons, feeling unheard, wanting change. It's more about understanding the complex layers of influence, sometimes hidden layers, and the ethical questions that arise within these fast-growing movements. It forces us to ask what was really being built here and ultimately who benefited most.
Which really raises that critical question for all of us, for you listening right now. When any movement gains traction so quickly, how do we actually discern its true drivers?
Yeah, how do you get past the surface appeal?
How do you understand the underlying motivations, the potential long-term impacts, beyond just the charismatic leader or nappy slogans? It really demands a deeper level of critical thinking about public discourse. So, to recap, we've walked through Charlie Kirk's early life Illinois roots, that incredibly fast founding of Turning Point USA at just 18.
A remarkable start.
We've seen how quickly he built that platform, capturing a youth audience. But critically, we've also highlighted this significant, often under-discussed factor, the role of wealthy donors.
Shaping things right from the beginning.
Influencing the trajectory, the message, perhaps even the core mission of both Kirk and TPUSA.
Indeed. And I think the core takeaway here, if there is one, is that the rise of this young icon looked to many like a classic grassroots movement.
Rooted in those free market ideals.
Right. But it very quickly became deeply intertwined with powerful financial interests. And that illustrates this really complex ongoing interplay between public rhetoric, the face of a movement, and the underlying financial realities that power it.
A dynamic that's still shaping our politics today.
Constantly. And it really demands our careful attention.
So maybe that leaves you with something to think about. How do the origins, the early funding of any prominent figure or movement, how does that initial money shape not just the message we hear, but the ultimate legacy?
And the real-world impact on society.
Exactly. What does that mean for how we as citizens need to critically evaluate public discourse? Always remembering that the surface story, well, it's rarely the only story.
The crucial question.
This is really just the start of our deep dive into the complexities here. We hope you'll keep these initial thoughts in mind as we continue to explore.
Have you ever stopped to think about how the idea of protection, keeping things safe, can sometimes morph into excluding people, pushing them away?
It's a really fundamental tension, isn't it?
It is. And it brings us right to today's deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into the immigration stance, the very hardline stance of Charlie Kirk. He's someone who consistently talks about borders, national defense, but through this specific frame, often using the term biblical protection.
Right. So we're going to look closely at his actual proposals, the kind of language, the rhetoric he uses to back them up.
And then the ethics of it all, the history.
Yeah.
Where does this fit?
Exactly. What's truly fascinating here is we're aiming to understand the mechanisms behind these views and, crucially, the real-world outcomes.
So not just theory.
Not just theory. We want to grasp Kirk's specific ideas, how he phrases them, and really look critically at how these ideas play out in society, what they mean for all of us.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What are Kirk's core proposals on immigration? It seems to boil down to a pretty drastic reduction.
That's the heart of it. He's famously called for a net zero immigration moratorium.
Net zero. That sounds absolute.
It basically signals a complete halt. No immigration. His reasoning is quite stark. He says things like, immigration without assimilation is invasion.
Invasion. Wow.
And he warns that mass migration amounts to national suicide. So this isn't just about adjusting numbers. It's presented as an existential issue.
And that word, invasion. Let's talk about the rhetoric he uses for migrants themselves. Invaders seems to be a common term for him.
Very common. He doesn't just say immigrants. He explicitly calls them invaders. And this ties directly into his promotion of the Great Replacement theory.
Ah, yes. Explain that a bit for people who might not be familiar.
Sure. He confidently argues that Democrats have a deliberate plan to diminish white demographics. It's a theory suggesting an intentional, orchestrated population shift. Kirk presents it as a serious threat to national identity.
And he's quite vocal about this online.
Extremely. You see it clearly in his posts. For instance, September 8th, 2025, he posted, "Mass migration is a weapon of mass destruction."
Weapon of mass destruction.
Before that, August 3rd, 2025. "The Great Replacement is not a conspiracy theory, it's a government policy." Very direct, very strong language.
So alongside this rhetoric, what about enforcement? His calls there seem equally intense.
They are. He's openly endorsed using force, things like tear gas, even whips, against people crossing the border.
Whips.
Seriously.
Yes. And he made the statement back in 2023. It was quite chilling. He said, "If you enter, we have lethal force, and we're willing to use it."
Lethal force.
And this kind of aggressive talk sometimes goes along with him spreading claims that later get completely debunked, like that story about Haitians eating tets in Ohio. Totally false, but he pushed it.
So it seems like a pattern of using fear-based rhetoric, maybe not always tied to facts.
That appears to be part of the strategy, yes, to create alarm. Now, the part that often comes up, and it's quite striking, is how Kirk wraps this all in biblical language.
Yes, that's a central pillar. He makes these very confident claims like borders are biblical
Okay.
and defending your nation is biblical. He even goes so far as to call compassion for migrants a moral failing of the American church.
A moral failing. Wow. So he's essentially saying the Bible supports these hardline policies.
That's his argument. If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Hmm.
his interpretation relies on very literal readings of certain texts.
Like what, for example?
Well, he might point to Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, to protect the city,
Yeah.
or Old Testament passages about tribal protection. The focus is squarely on preserving the nation, the tribe.
Right. Protecting the U.S.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then, if you look at broader ethical interpretations of Scripture, you get a very different picture.
How so?
Well, those same walls in Nehemiah could be seen metaphorically like inner boundaries against doing wrong, not physical walls against people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these powerful repeated calls to welcome the stranger. Think Exodus 22.21, don't oppress the foreigner because you were foreigners in Egypt.
Or Matthew 25, right. I was a stranger and you welcomed me.
Precisely. These texts emphasize compassion, shared humanity, finding peace through welcome, not division. So ethically, Kirk's approach seems to prioritize, a very narrow group interest over that universal call to kindness.
Which can lead to real suffering.
Absolutely. It highlights how the same text can be used to justify completely opposite actions, exclusion versus embrace. It's fascinating.
It really is. And speaking of shifts, Kirk's own views haven't always been this extreme, have they?
That's right. It's interesting to track the change. Back around, say, 2019, he actually seemed to support legal immigration, even from diverse places.
Really? What was the condition?
The condition was that immigrants should align with what he called ethical monotheism, belief in one God, a shared moral code, and of course, constitutional values. So there was room, but within a specific framework.
But here's where it gets really interesting,
Yeah.
because that changed.
It changed dramatically. By 2025, his position had hardened considerably. Any nuance seemed gone.
How so?
He started explicitly calling multiculturalism a failure, just flat out rejected it.
Okay.
And he began implying that even naturalized citizens weren't, real Americans unless they showed complete loyalty as he defined it.
Mm-hmm.
And the warnings grew louder about foreigners, especially non-Christians,
Right.
being a threat to America's Christian heritage.
So a definite shift towards a more exclusionary view.
Yes. This raises an important question. What drives that kind of shift?
Yep.
It could be many things. The political winds changing, specific events, maybe seeing what resonates with his base. The overall trend seems towards a more ethno-nationalist perspective, prioritizing a perceived cultural purity.
And when you dig into the motivations behind this rhetoric, what comes up? You mentioned this idea of dismissing the humanity of migrants.
Yeah, and often it's linked back to something fairly basic.
Mm.
This idea described as greed, like hoarding resources, keeping opportunities for us and away from them.
Right. But is there more to it? Maybe economic factors.
Well, that's where it gets quite revealing. This kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric can actually align with certain economic interests. Think about private detention centers, for example.
How so?
Stricter enforcement, more detentions. That means more business for them. So there can be this feedback loop where the language used to argue for protection also financially benefits industries built around detention and border security.
So the rhetoric isn't just abstract. It can have tangible financial beneficiaries.
Precisely. It's a complex link between the word used and who might profit from the policies those words support.
And the impact on people, the real-world consequences. We've touched on suffering, but let's be specific.
The outcomes are deeply concerning. We've seen policies fueled by this kind of thinking lead to things like family separations, which cause immense trauma.
Heartbreaking stuff.
Absolutely. And there's a documented rise in xenophobic violence, in hate crimes, particularly noticeable after 2016 when this rhetoric became more mainstream. It genuinely fosters division. It doesn't build unity. It creates fissures in society.
It feels like we've seen this kind of thing before, historically. Does Kirk's ideology echo past movements?
Oh, definitely. You can draw pretty clear lines to, say, the nativism in the U.S. back in the 1920s.
With the immigration quotas.
Exactly. Those quotas were designed specifically to limit people from Southern and Eastern Europe, from Asia. It fueled isolationism and, tragically, played a role in the refugee crises around World War II when people fleeing persecution were turned away. It's a grim historical parallel.
And are there other echoes, maybe even more worrying ones?
Well, when you hear the Great Replacement talk, the invasion rhetoric, it's hard not to be reminded of 1930s Nazi propaganda.
How so?
That propaganda also framed specific groups, Jewish people, migrants, minorities, as dangerous outsiders, as threats to national purity and stability. And we know where that led.
The catastrophe.
Utter catastrophe. Even going back further to the 1800s in the U.S., you had nativist movements targeting Irish, Italian, Chinese immigrants. It always led to exploitation, discrimination, real pain. History consistently shows these exclusionary views don't lead to good outcomes. They lead to conflict and suffering. It's a stark lesson.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Let's try to pull it together. So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, we've looked at Charlie Kirk's very assertive immigration stance, the net zero idea, calling migration an invasion, pushing the Great Replacement theory.
Right, and how he uses this biblical protection framing, which contrasts sharply with other ethical interpretations of those same texts.
We talked about the real-world impacts, the suffering, the rise in xenophobia, even potential links to industries that profit from stricter borders.
And crucially, those historical parallels, the echoes of past nativism and exclusionary ideologies that always seem to end badly.
So as you think about all this, maybe reflect on the power of language that divides people into categories, that excludes.
Yeah, really question whether the solutions being offered, especially the ones that sound loudest and most confident about protection, do they actually lead to harmony, or do they just sow more division?
Exactly. And consider this. How often are calls for protection really about protecting everyone's well-being versus protecting very specific interests? What does it actually take to build a society that thrives not on walls, but on, shared humanity and genuine well-being for all?
That's definitely something to keep thinking about.